tuning in to the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. I'm Dave Kluge, joined today with Jagger May as Alfredo Brown is in Florida dealing with some of the after effects from Hurricane Milton. We are going to wish him the best and hope to have him back on the show soon. But Jagger, today we're going to talk about some must-start options for Week 6. We do the show every single Friday. We're going to start off with some of our must-start players and then some deep streamers. Then we're going to get into some of the most dropped players that made it through waivers this week. And then we're going to finish off the show finishing off the show with some listener questions, mailbag questions that we bring in from our listeners, helping you guys set your lineups this week. So, Jagger, let's not bury the lead here. Let's go ahead and start it off. Your must-start running back for Week 6, Tony Pollard. Let's hear why you are in on Tony Pollard in this matchup.
Well, it's what you said, it's the matchup. And really, Tony Pollard has done well for us all season, despite being on the Titans that have been a disaster in the passing game. So if you think about the one part of the offense working against one of the easiest defensive matchups as far as running backs go against the Colts. I mean, the Colts D is allowing the fourth most yards per play. I mean, in rushing, it's even worse. They're a straight up rush funnel defense. If anything, I mean, they're a fire all cannons defense. And if you have like any deep rosters or deep leagues, then I would even start some of the lesser known guys against them. They're that bad. So it's an easy matchup. This is the one time that you can use Tony Pollard, and he's the best part of that offense.
We heard so much this offseason about how there was going to be a 1A, 1B scenario, that it was going to be a committee. And they can say that in the offseason, but we're 5 weeks into the year now. We've seen what we've seen. And Tony Pollard right now is 12th in the league in touches per game. He's averaging 18.5 touches per game. Meanwhile, Tajay Spears, 9.8 per game. He's just, it's pretty much 1-3, 2-3 split in favor of Tony Pollard, and he's looked really good now. Full year removed from that tightrope procedure, so I am very in on Tony Pollard. Are there some guys you'd start him ahead of that you can throw out there right now, Jagger? I've got him as my RB13 on the week because it is a good matchup. I've got him ahead of some big names. Brian Robinson has a really tough matchup against Baltimore. I'm starting Tony Pollard ahead of Brian Robinson. J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, even the guy I'm going to talk about next, who is my start of the week. I actually prefer Tony Pollard to him. Just a really good matchup. He's, borderline RB1 for me this week.
Yeah, you named it. Najee Harris, Brian Robinson is someone on the start sit show that I've been firing the horn for. I've been pounding the table. This is, again, the Baltimore defense hasn't been very good in the pass game, but the rushing, it's been abysmal for any team. They're giving up like 60 yards per play or 60 yards a game. So obviously someone like that is someone I'm sitting, and basically that range of like mid-tier running backs that Tony Pollard always sits in, he's now at the top for a borderline RB1. So,
right. And so much like through the first 5 weeks, I was talking about players and I was talking about talent and I was talking about opportunities, but now we're at the point in the season where we've seen enough from defenses that we can start to identify trends. We can see the teams that are good against the run, good against the pass. 1, 2, 3 weeks into the season, we could chalk a lot of that up as fluky, but now we've got 5 games and we can start to draw some conclusions on what these defenses look like. And that brings me to my guy that I want to talk about, Najee Harris, going up against Las Vegas. A really good matchup here. The Raiders are 5th in points allowed to running backs. They're allowing 26.7 points per game to the running back position. And the opportunity has been there for Najee Harris. He's seen almost 20 opportunities per game, 19.8 to be exact. This is still a game where we're not expecting to see Jalen Warren. He's been banged up. Cordell Patterson has also been banged up. Now, I can also tie this in and say that Justin Fields is a must start, but I think that at this point. He has been on an absolute tear. But that's how I see the Pittsburgh Steelers attacking the Raiders in this matchup, is on the ground. I think we're going to see a heavy dose of Najee Harris. We're going to see a heavy dose of Justin Fields. And the touchdowns and the fantasy points haven't been there for Najee Harris so far, but the opportunity has been. And now he finally has a good matchup. We could see him get right. So I've got him one spot behind Tony Pollard, the guy that you talked about, but a lot of the same names we talked about: Brian Robinson, J.K. Dobbins, Rico Dowdle, DeAndre Swift, James Cook, Rashad White. I'm starting Tony Pollard and Najee Harris ahead of all of those guys this week. Like you said, that kind of cluster of RB2s, I think it's Tony Pollard and Najee Harris are the guys sitting atop that group going into week 6.
Yeah, I call those the matchup tiers. It's like these running backs don't suck. They're on spotty offenses. If the matchup's good, that's when you're playing them.
Let's move on to some wide receivers, because I think for the most part, the running backs that you're starting. Volume and opportunity is everything there. And if you've got a running back getting volume, you're starting him. Wide receivers is where we need to get a little bit more nerdy and start kind of looking at the matchups and things like that. So, Jagger, talk to us about the first wide receiver you are starting in Week 6. Zay Flowers. Just call it like it is. The passing volume hasn't really been there for Baltimore this year, and because of that, the overall production hasn't been there for Zay Flowers, but he's looked great when he's gotten the opportunity, and this matchup presents potential opportunities. So let's hear Zay Flowers and why you're starting him in Week 6.
You named it. It's all about opportunity. A lot of the start sit advice I get is if they're a good player is the first start, and then I'm looking if they're on a good team, and then the third most important thing is who are they going against, and going against as far as a matchup in the passing game. We've all known the Commanders have been, with the exception of one fluky game, I think from the Cardinals, have been a pretty juicy matchup, and particularly the game script is what I like. Right now, the over and under for that game is 51 and a half points.
Be a
And they're
shootout.
up. Yeah, it's going to be a shootout. I think it's crazy that they have the Commanders plus 25 at this point because I honestly see them just abandoning the run, and both teams are just going to start chunking the ball. And that's what I really like. And right now, Zay Flowers is the target leader. Granted, it is low volume offense, but Zay Flowers is the only one who has guaranteed targets at this point. And if I'm going to have the wide receiver one for one of the most explosive quarterbacks in the NFL, I'm going to take Zay Flowers at this point. To me, this is an easy smash play.
Yeah, and I've got Lamar Jackson as my quarterback one this week because of the matchup. And this is one where we can look more than just the last 5 weeks of data. This isn't just Washington's
Hmm.
secondary being bad over the last 5 games. They were bad all of last season as well. So this isn't a fluke where we're saying, like, we got to look at the matchups from the season. No, this secondary has been awful for a year and a half. We got to remember DJ Moore gashed this secondary for 200
Yep.
plus yards and 3 touchdowns on Thursday night last year. I mean, this is just what they do is they give up a lot of yards through the air. And then on offense, they've got a fast paced, high scoring offense that is going to give Baltimore plenty of opportunities to be on the field. So, again, let's try to make it a little bit actionable here. I have Zay Flowers very high in my Week 6 rankings. He's my wide receiver 16. And if you look at the production thus far, that might sound insane. I'm starting him ahead of T. Higgins, Marvin Harrison, Garrett Wilson, Terry McLaurin, some really big names that I have Zay Flowers ahead of in my Week 6 rankings.
Yeah, I have him actually just behind Terry McLaurin there, just because I think that's going to be a fun game, and they're both top 15 for me, so I'm incredibly bullish. I'm also a massive Zay Flowers fan.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that's
You
yeah, I'm
you've
just
been
a
the Zay
huge.
Flowers guy, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a good player. And we
Mm.
saw we've seen the versatility so much. Like he was very much so just a deep ball specialist at Boston College. And then last year to start the season, it was his little dink and dunk routes,
Yep.
at the line of scrimmage. And then at the end of the year, he starts getting more downfield. And now in year two, we're seeing all of it where he's getting downfield, he's getting the jet sweeps, he's getting the screens. I mean, he can really do it all. Just a really fun player that we all like here at Football Guys. I'm going to talk about my next guy, Amari Cooper, and this is another matchup that we're not just looking at the last 5 weeks. We're looking at all of last year and the last 5 weeks. The Philadelphia Eagles have been a pass funnel so far. Teams have really been able to beat them through the air. Currently, this year, they are fourth in points allowed to wide receivers. They are giving up an average of 44 points per game to opposing wide receivers. And the production for Amari Cooper has been up and down, largely in part because of Deshaun Watson, as Alfredo likes to say, has been cheeks this season, just absolutely terrible.
Terrible.
You look at any metric, and he is down at like the very bottom with Bryce Young. And I mean, I don't know I know why he's still starting. They're paying him a lot of money, but getting way off on a tangent here. Deshaun Watson's been terrible. Amari Cooper has not been terrible. He's still averaging 9.4 targets per game. So with the matchup and with the opportunity, I'm still firing him up. I don't want to say with confidence. It is shaky because of Deshaun Watson and the way that he's been playing. But I've got Amari Cooper as a wide receiver 2 this week. He's inside my top 24. I've got him at wide receiver 21 ahead of Jameson Williams, George Pickens, Devonta Smith, who, we could see less involvement now that we expect A.J. Brown to be back. Darnell Mooney, Brian Thomas, Tank Dell. Those are some guys that I have behind Amari Cooper in my rankings. So trying to get him in my lineups where I can because this is a good matchup. The opportunity has been there, 10 targets per game over the last 3 weeks. It feels gross, Jagger. I know you're probably feeling the same way. Like, you don't want to play anybody in Cleveland because of how bad it's been. But am I crazy for going back to the well and just plugging Amari in as kind of a high end wide receiver too this week?
I mean, it's one of those cases where we're hitting the bye weeks. There's a lot of injuries. It's
Mhm.
hard for me to think that Amari Cooper is going to be sitting again on anyone's roster at this point. And then when you have a matchup that is as easy as Philadelphia has been, I mean, their studs that they had that they ran to the Super Bowl with all cooked. It
Mhm.
was a big deal that they're putting Cooper DeJean in the slot, and he had one of the worst preseason games and grades, and that's preseason. So he could improve, but what I'm saying is that it's as easy as any game right now. And hopefully, maybe all the discussion that's going on with Cleveland has sparked something in somebody, and they can at least scheme up something easy for one of the best wide receivers that they've ever had.
Yeah, completely agree. I was hoping you'd talk me off the cliff a little bit and tell me that I was crazy for starting him,
No.
but now I might just move him up another spot just because of that. All right, Jagger. We're gonna get a little bit deeper with these next guys that we're talking about here. I think the guys that we talked about, Tony Pollard, Najee Harris, Zay Flowers, Amari Cooper, in deep leagues, you're starting those guys regardless. But in your shallow leagues, they might kind of be on that start sit bubble. So we're trying to help you
Mhm.
there. But let's talk about some of the deeper guys here, some of the streamers going into week 6. Start us off. You've kind of got a group of guys here that you want to talk about, and I don't know where you're going with this conversation, but I'm really excited to have it and dig in. So, talk to us about who else you're starting in week 6.
Well, it's the Saints wide receivers, and I know Chris Olave isn't a small name, and Rashid Shaheed isn't at this point, but Derek Carr's injured, and I know some people may be scared off. But I'll ask you, Dave, do you think there's an actual drop off between Spencer Rattler and Derek Carr? If you really think about a floor, Derek Carr has one of the lowest floors in the
Yeah,
NFL. And like the common thing that you've been saying, it's not just that we have a 5 week sample. We have a career sample of Derek
right.
Carr have an incredibly low floor. And I was one of the lowest on Spencer Rattler as a prospect, but here's what Spencer Rattler is good at. He has a lot of arm talent and he will chuck it. And I
Give me a lot
know
of
that
YOLO balls.
there's a bit I'm not saying start Spencer Rattler, but what I'm
Right.
saying is when you have someone who has one of the best deep target rates, I think he's third,
Mhm.
in Rashid Shaheed, you're gonna put him in your lineup because he's gonna be boom or bust. Probably a boom when you consider this easy matchup. Then on top of that, Chris Olave is a good player. I'm not one to take interviews, but I do know that Spencer Rattler knows his job is that he should be looking for Chris Olave early and often. So I'm still going to put these people out there because I was putting them out there when Derek Carr was out there. And if anything, Spencer Rattler can actually throw the ball deep.
Yeah, for years we were like begging for Jameis Winston to get the start in New
Yep.
Orleans, and now we kind of do. Like, Spencer Rattler's got a little Jameis Winston in his game. Like, he's just going to chuck it down there and let these guys make plays. Um, I think a lot of people are going to be scared off, and what I want to talk about real quickly is you talk about Derek Carr. I've
Mhm.
always said that Derek Carr is like if your starting quarterback for your NFL team is worse than Derek Carr, you got a huge problem because Derek Carr is like just below league average, and if you're below that, that's not where you want to be. Like, that's kind of the litmus test for, is your quarterback good? Is he better than Derek Carr? Cool, you can get it done. And if he's worse than Derek Carr, well, then you probably want to keep looking. But through the first 2 weeks, we really got duped by this Saints offense. They had two big wins, but now with the benefit of hindsight, we can look back and say, yeah, they beat up the Panthers, as pretty much every team that's faced the Panthers so far has done this year. The Saints beating the Cowboys in week 2.
Mhm.
I think we were really surprised by that, but we've since seen that the Cowboys defense isn't the defense it's been in years past. Might have been a little bit fluky. The Saints look good in that game, but then, lost to the Eagles, lost to the Falcons, a loss to the Chiefs, and all of a sudden we start to see the old Derek Carr rear his head in that game when he kind of, was avoiding pressure and just closed his eyes and just chucked a moonball
Chuck
up
it.
downfield where like no Saints receiver was anywhere near. It's like, oh, there's Derek Carr. That's the Derek Carr that I've known over the last few years. So I don't know if I could say it's an upgrade or a downgrade going to Spencer Rattler, but I think it's kind of a lateral move for the team and an upgrade for the wide receivers. So I'm with you, man. And did you see Rattler? They talked to him yesterday in a press conference. Did you hear what he had to say about Chris Olave, where he was just like, "He's good, and I'm going to force him the ball."
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what I'm saying. He knows his job, and to not get on to stick on the Saints, the Buccaneers have a really bad defense. They're allowing the fifth most passing yards per game. One of their best defensive backs, Antoine Winfield, is only just now coming back from injury. So it to me, there's a best matchup as any with an effort quarterback. So I'm here for it.
No, I like it, and I'm looking at my rankings right now. I haven't really budged on Chris Olave. I've still got him pretty high in my rankings as a wide receiver too. Rashid Shaheed, I mean, he's a guy that you just can't bet against. Like his ability to just take any ball to the house, to get behind defenses. That's the guy you want in your lineup because every single
Mhm.
week he has matchup winning upside. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up here, talking about the kind of deeper guys that we're starting in this week. And for me, Jalen Tolbert going up against Detroit is a guy that I'm trying to get into my lineups. And Jalen Tolbert, a lot of casual fantasy managers probably don't even know his name. He was drafted a couple of years ago out of where was it, Alfredo? I want to say like Southern Alabama or something like that. It
Um,
was a small school, and it took him
yeah.
some time to adapt to the NFL. And we see that often where these guys coming from small schools take some time, but it looks like he's up to NFL speed now. And he's got a great matchup against Detroit. Now, Detroit is a very good defense, but their defensive strength is in their run game. Against wide
Mhm.
receivers, they're giving up almost 46 fantasy points per game, the second most among all NFL teams. Teams have to pass against Detroit because they can't run. So this is going to be a very pass heavy script for the Dallas Cowboys. And last week we saw Jalen Tolbert with no Brandon Cooks was able to pull 10 targets, including two end zone targets on the game winning drive, showing that Dak Prescott has a lot of trust in Jalen Tolbert to make those plays. He's starting to grow and blossom now that Brandon Cooks is out of the lineups. And I've got him pretty high in my rankings this week. So, again, this is a streamer. I'm not saying that you need to like bench your studs and get Jalen Tolbert in your lineup, but I've got him ahead of Wandale Robinson. I've got him ahead of DeAndre Hopkins, Josh Downs, Calvin Ridley. Jagger, I'm interested in hearing how high you have Jalen Tolbert in your rankings. He falls in as my wide receiver 32, which is way ahead of consensus, but definitely a flag plant that I want to get him in lineups this week.
Oh man, you made me feel good because I was like, man, he's top 36 for me.
All right,
So
all right, there we
yeah,
are.
yeah. And again, when you look at the 5 game sample size, he's only had 2 games that have been under double digits, and he had a couple of games where he had over 20 points in PPR. And when we think about Brandon Cooks, no pun intended, actually pun intended, he's cooked at this point. And again, I love the matchup. So when you think about a team where I think they're passing at one of the highest rates in the NFL at this point, he's the wide receiver two at the across from CeeDee Lamb, and probably the X because they move CeeDee
Hmm.
Lamb in the slot a lot, and then you have Jake Ferguson there. That's a guy I'm putting in my lineups everywhere. And you're right, he did come from Southern Alabama. He did have day 2 draft capital and was touted as being a developmental guy. If you really think about it, I think he really is Michael Gallup 2.0. Michael
Yes,
Gallup came
such a
from
similar player.
CSU. Yeah, they're very similar players. So if you liked Michael Gallup, that's what I think about Jalen Tolbert. He had to come on a little bit slow, but he's Dallas's X, and he is the wide receiver two in one of the most pass heavy offenses in the NFL. Wheels up for me.
And is there a team that looks like they could score at will easier than the Detroit Lions? I mean, they make it so easy that in this matchup, I think that we're just going to see a game where Dallas is going to be forced to pass a lot. We could see 50, 60 pass attempts for Dak here because we know that Dallas doesn't have a good defense. And when Detroit is on offense, they just drive down the field so easily that I think there's going to be a lot of passing volume in this game. So obviously, CeeDee Lamb, you're starting him, but he's my wide receiver one in the week. Jake Ferguson is my tight end 6 on the week, and then we talked about Jalen Tolbert, my wide receiver 32. I expect there to be a lot of volume in this passing attack for Dallas. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next segment of the show here. We like to do after waivers are cleared. We like to look at some of the most dropped players and see if there is, one man's trash could be another man's treasure. These are the guys that have been dropped in the most leagues. I'm just going to go ahead and rattle them all off here. Jagger, you can talk about one, two, three. You can talk about all of them if you think they're all good pickups. But let's go through this list of the most dropped players. We've got Trey Sermon, Juwan Jennings, Rashi Rice, RIP, Cam Akers, Jordan Whittington, Zach Ertz, Justice Hill, Andre Yosavash, Colby Parkinson, Tutu Atwell, Jerry Judy, Carson Steele, and Emmanuel Wilson. Now, a lot of these players do have buys this week, which is why we see them get dropped. But Jagger, if you see any of these guys available in your leagues, are there any guys that you're trying to jump on, or do you think this is just a lot of trash?
If I'm right now, injuries are so bad that the trash is starting to look like treasures. I like Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell while there's still Rams injuries. If you want a low floor and at least someone in a competent offense with a good quarterback, Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell are two guys that I don't mind rostering and streaming if possible. Cam Akers, yeah, you could pick him up, but Joe Mixon, I mean, he's gonna like, what's the point at this point? And that's where
I
I'm
mean,
at
Joe
with the
Mixon
running
still
backs.
isn't practicing. I feel like that needs to be talked about. I mean, Jeff Bell and I are going to talk about it tomorrow on the Friday injury show that we do. Dude, my panic meter is beeping loudly. We saw something similar with Joe Mixon back in 2020. I'm
Mm.
sure you remember where, oh yeah, minor injury, no big deal. He's day to day. Oh, now he's week to week. Maybe he'll be back next week. Just kidding. His season's over. I don't want to say that that's what's happening with Joe Mixon, but this guy logged to practice 2 weeks ago. I don't know if he aggravated his injury or what it is. Now they're calling him week to week. He still isn't practicing. I think the issue is that Cam Akers just isn't good. Like he really isn't. And Dare
Never has
Ogunbowale
been.
is, yeah, and Dare Ogunbowale is starting to carve out all of the high value touches. It's like Cam Akers, like if he could score from 20 yards out, he pays off on any given week. But Dare is getting all of the passing down work. They lean on Dare once they get a little bit closer to the end zone. But I don't want to start Dare Agumbawale either. Like he's not that great. So it's just kind of like two league average running backs splitting touches. You don't really know who the points are going to. So you got to wonder too, like Damian Pierce might be coming back this week. Is Damian Pierce a
Mhm.
guy that you're maybe thinking about picking up and plugging in if Joe Mixon can't go?
To be honest, if Damian Pierce is coming back, I'm taking him over Cam Akers. It's
Yeah.
like you said, Cam Akers is just not good. Uh, and at this
And
point, I
honestly, he
think
wasn't very good before the injuries either. Like,
no.
the injuries just made a not good player even worse.
Yeah, I mean, he was losing his job already, and we forgot that Cam Akers didn't have a job until Joe Mixon got hurt. He was unemployed. There wasn't people pounding the door for Cam Akers in the NFL, and you really shouldn't either. You know,
Yeah.
and, Justice Hill, I think, should be rostered. That's
Yeah.
one I think. Yeah, the only people who are guaranteed targets in the Ravens is Zay Flowers and Justice Hill at this point. So
And I'd say Justice Hill more than just picked up. I almost talked about Justice Hill as a streamer this week. We talked about that
yeah.
matchup against Washington. If this ends up being a shootout, as much as the Ravens love to lean on Derrick Henry, if they're in a negative game script, they don't really have that luxury. And then Justice Hill comes in and just gobbles up a bunch of short targets. So Justice Hill also makes for not only a player you should pick up, but a player that you might be desperate enough to stream here in week 6. All right, Jagger. Talked about our starts, talked about our streamers, talked about some of the guys that we want to pick up off of waivers. The one thing I forgot to do, of course, because Alfredo's not here. Like, subscribe, review, comment, all that good stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. Definitely appreciate that. And if you're listening on audio, please leave a review. I know we're supposed to do that in the first 5 minutes of the show, but hey, if you're still listening, that means you're a really loyal fan. So I know that you will definitely give that thumbs up and comment. But let's go ahead and jump into our mailbag questions. As always, if you have any questions, you can DM them to us on Twitter, either me, Alfredo, Jagger, or Jeff Bell. He'll be more than happy to help as well. Or you can send an email to fantasyshow@footballguys.com. Let's go ahead and jump in with this first one, Jagger. I'll talk nice and slow so you can look at all these guys in your rankings. We've got Liam. He is saying that he needs to bench 1 and start 3. Jaden Reed, Malik Neighbors, AJ Brown, Amon St. Brown. This guy's just flexing on us, Jagger. That's really
Mhm.
all it is. This guy's just saying, "Look at my roster," isn't he?
Yeah, that's I say this all the time. I start sit show. It's like, cool, man. I'm glad you made the show. You did good.
I mean, I think I think a lot of people would probably say AJ Brown. I think he's the lowest in consensus rankings, but I'm going AJ Brown over Jaden Reed. Amon-Ra and Neighbors are both inside my top 3. Those are must starts. So, I mean, as
Mhm.
crazy as it sounds, I think I'm benching Jaden Reed in this matchup, even though, like, what he's done with Jordan Love has been great, but, it's been a lot of big plays and touchdowns. If those dry up, the target volume hasn't been there. I'm going to A.J. Brown if he's active, even coming off of the hamstring.
Yeah, I'm putting AJ Brown in because you see that the Eagles' offense has been competent
Mhm.
without AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. It cratered. So I'm not taking the Eagles' recent struggles as a sign to bench AJ. I'm taking it as a sign that clearly AJ's one of the most important players on this team. And it sucks, but you're right. I'm probably benching Jaden Reed. He's been great when Jordan Love's out there, and I'm not worried about Jordan Love. But again, there's just a lot more competition right now on that team, regardless of what you think about Wicks or Dubs, or now you got Tucker Craft to
Tucker
worry
Craft.
about.
Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah, that's what I'd say is to bench Jaden Reed. And I think last year, if I saw this, my advice would have been trade one of these guys away and try to fill another position of need. But man, with the way that wide receivers have been going down with injuries this year, I'm just holding on to all 4 of those guys. I'll live with, the boom weeks on my bench every now and then, knowing that I've got some insurance in case injuries do pop up. Way to go, Liam. Great drafting there. You got yourself a heck of a team. Congratulations. Next question comes from Colts Empire on Twitter, and he says, I already have Tucker Craft and Dallas Goddard, but was offered Travis Kelsey for Joe Mixon. So, yeah, this is a start sit show, but we're versatile. We do it all. We're going to talk trades as well. Jagger, what are you doing here? If you've already got Tucker Craft and Dallas Goddard, is there any reason to bring in a guy like Travis Kelsey?
I certainly like Kelsey better than Goddard, but again, it's the injury thing. I know we just talked about Mixon and being worried about it, but you have Mason Jacobs, and then a bunch of questions after that. At least with Mixon, when he comes back, he's going to be in a good offense and he has a role. So I'm probably just keeping him. And if I'm going to trade for a running back or another a tight end, I might try to trade some of these other guys. And then pick up a third option if you have the bench depth to kind of rotate in there if you need it.
Yeah, and I was pounding the table for Joe Mixon this offseason and preseason. Love the talent and scheme fit here, what Joe Mixon does and what Bobby Slowick does and how this offensive line blocks. It seemed like a match made in heaven, but I don't know, man. Buying a 28-year-old running back who has been injured for over a month now and still isn't practicing, and like I said, my panic meter on Joe Mixon is starting to beep a little bit. I don't know if he's a player that I'm trying to acquire in trades right now, especially if I have to give up a guy like Travis Kelsey. If I'm trying to acquire Joe Mixon, I'm hoping that I could buy super, super, super low on a team that has a winning record. We're like, hey, here's a wide receiver 3 that you can start this week in return for Joe Mixon. I don't know if I'd want to give up a guy like Travis Kelsey, who has seen his target volume increase quite a bit since Rashi Rice has been out. Um, Oh, there was actually more context to this. His running backs are Jordan Mason, Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, Chase Brown, and Tracy. So he does have some depth here, but no, I think you stick with Travis Kelsey or you stick with Joe Mixon in that spot, and you don't trade him away for cheap. Next question comes in from Travis. He is a regular friend of ours on Twitter, TJ
Mhm.
Kill 81, and he says Cortland Sutton or Tyrone Tracy in a full PPR flex spot. This is an easy one for me, Jagger. I don't know if you're going to struggle with this one at all. Cortland Sutton or Tyrone Tracy, who are you going with?
I'm gonna put in Tyrone Tracy. I
Cat's
want
out of the
no
bag,
part.
baby.
Yeah, like I
Yeah.
want no part of the Broncos offense. Even when they've had good matchups and like won a game, Cortland Sutton didn't really do much for you. Whereas like you said, the cat's out of the bag at Tyrone Tracy. I know that I know that Brian Dayball loves him some Devin Singletary, but you got to get this kid more touches. So yeah, I'm shooting for the upside, especially the Bengals have been a pretty poor defense. And I know their defensive tackles have finally come back healthy, but Tyron Tracy can actually catch passes too, and he didn't last game. So that's
Mhm.
something else that can we could start to see in the future.
Only 2 targets, I believe. I
Yep.
heard somebody, and I can't remember who, and I feel terrible. Somebody made a Johnson comp, and now that's all I can see. Like, he really looks like David Johnson. He is just such a fun, explosive player. I think long term, and by long term, I mean this season alone, I do have a little bit of concern because Devin Singletary, he might be a little bit relatively undersized and he might be relatively unathletic, but he does all of those hard-nosed, gritty things that NFL coaches like, and he's got the connection with Brian Dable. He's not going to just disappear from this offense. He's going to remain involved. But we saw the upside with a guy like Tyrone Tracy. And let's not forget last week, they wanted to go with Eric Gray. Like the entire first drive, it was all Eric Gray. And I'm like, what are they doing? And then Tyrone Tracy came out and was so good that they couldn't put him back on the bench. So I think Tyrone Tracy is going to continue to be involved. Devin Singletary has logged a limited practice already this week. He's back at practice today on Thursday. We'll see if he's able to suit up. If Devin Singletary can't suit up, Tyrone Tracy is going to be inside my top 12 this week. If he does, he's still kind of a borderline flex play, but I will definitely take him over Cortland Sutton, whether Devin Singletary plays or not. Next
Mhm.
question here is from Roger Novak 10 on Twitter, and he says Jamison Williams, Amari Cooper, or Jacoby Myers for my flex spot in half PPR. Already starting Deontay Johnson and Terry McLaurin. I'll take this one first, Jagger. Amari Cooper easily for me. I already talked about him as my start of the week. Explicitly said that I have him ahead of Jamison Williams and Jacoby Myers. You know, the volume is going to be there without Devontae Adams, but I'm still taking Amari Cooper pretty easily out of these three.
Yeah, no pushback from me.
All right. Next one comes from Steven on Twitter. And he says, need two of these four in full PPR: JSN, Wandale Robinson, Tank Dell, or Rashid Shaheed. Jagger, between JSN, Wandale, Tank, and Shaheed, who are the two that you are starting in full PPR this week?
I am for sure putting out Shaheed.
Mhm.
Wandale Robinson is pretty low upside, so but you could argue the same about JSN. But at least Seattle, their passing offense has been explosive since Ryan Grubbs has started play calling. Geno Smith, I think he's leading in yards. Him and Brock Purdy are one of the two leading in yards. So I'd probably yin and yang it. JSN for floor, Shaheed for ceiling. Tank Dell's just not back from his injury yet, so it's one of those
Yeah.
things that you're holding till you see it now. I mean, we know he can be good, but the dude shattered his leg and then got shot. I know, and it's hard to practice when you're recovering.
Well, I knew about the gunshot, and it happened in April, like definitely a lull in the NFL offseason where a lot of people aren't super plugged in. Just the other day, I was digging deeper into because I'm like, what the hell is going on with Tank Dell? Like, we know he's a good player, and I went back, I've watched all of his targets from this season, and weeks 1 and 2, they were using him the same way they used him last year. He was stretching the field vertically, and he and CJ Stroud just could not get on the same page. Just all of these weird misfires. Um, and then they had that really blitz heavy game against Minnesota, where CJ Stroud struggled. And in that game, they didn't really have the luxury to run any deep balls for Tank Dell. All of his routes were short. They were trying to get the ball out of CJ Stroud's hands as quickly as possible. Then he missed week 4 with the injury, comes back in week 5. And in week 5, his ADOT actually went down from that week 3 game. I mean, he had an ADOT, an average target depth of 5 yards. So he's best when he can get behind defenses and when he can make big plays downfield on those crossers and pick up yards after the catch. But they're using him like a discount Wandale Robinson right now, and they're just throwing these short little passes to him, and it's not really being productive. So looked at his usage and was kind of confused by that. But I went back and looked at the reports from the shooting in April, and it was a lot worse than I think people realized. And teams don't have to report a lot of stuff there. Like they said, the bullet went through the back of his leg and out the front of his leg, like completely went through muscle and bone and everything. And we just expected it's April, he'll be fine. But clearly he is not the same player right now. So long term dynasty, I'm buying Tank Dell because we
Yeah.
know the dude can play. But I think looking at the rest of the 2024 season with Stephon Diggs there for the rest of the year, with him clearly not being the same player he was last year, I'm starting to temper expectations for the rest of this year a little bit. Looking at
If
my rankings,
anything
though, yeah,
if anything, them getting Stephon Diggs makes more sense because the
right,
team is just like
yeah.
Tank Dell's just not gonna be ready, you know?
And now, yeah, it does definitely make sense now. At the time, we were all like, "What are they doing adding Stephon Diggs here?" They probably knew more about Tank Dell's injury because you got to remember. I think it was before the shooting. It was in like March. We got that video where it's like Tank Dell is running 20 miles an hour again, and we were all excited for Tank Dell, and then there was a shooting, and we just kind of brushed it off and said, it's Tank Dell. We want to hold on to our priors. We see a rookie looking
Mhm.
really good. We say we want this guy in year 2, and it's just it's been a tough year for Tank Dell. I'm not ready to close the story on Tank Dell. He's still got a lot of career left. Excited for his long term outlook, but 2024 is probably going to continue being tough. To answer your question, though, here, Stephen, I understand why you're tilting. I'm looking at my rankings right now. I got Rashid Shaheed at wide receiver 28. I have Jackson Smith Njigba at wide receiver 30. I have Wandale Robinson at wide receiver 33, and I have Tank Dell at wide receiver 34. So, I mean, like, all four of these players are neck and neck. My rankings would say Rashid Shaheed and JSN, but they are all so close. It's a tough decision to make. So, hopefully you make the right one, Steven. Two
Yin and
questions
yang.
left. Yeah.
Yeah.
Two questions left. This one from Disco on Twitter, Sports Assets One. He says Cortland Sutton, Austin Eckler, or Wandale Robinson in the flex. Let's just, I'd assume this is PPR. That's the only leagues you're really thinking about starting Wandale or Eckler. So PPR rankings, Jagger, Cortland Sutton, Austin Eckler, Wandale Robinson. Who do you prefer?
Wandale, low. I think he has low upside, but as far as PPR, he's. I mean, it's a pass funnel solely to Wandale and Malik Neighbors, even when they're together. So
Yeah, especially against Cincinnati. Yeah, I've got Wandale Robinson about 10 spots ahead of Cortland Sutton in my rankings. So that's an easy one for me. Eckler, just haven't really seen it so far yet this year. I think we probably need an injury to Brian Robinson to really see him break out. But even then, you see Jeremy McNichols with an annoying amount of volume in those situations. So Eckler's probably just somebody you're stashing on your bench for now. Tough to get him into a lineup. Last question, Jagger. This one come from Webs2424 on Twitter. Bucky Irving or Tajay Spears in a pretty deep PPR league. Rashad White is healthy, but we have seen Bucky Irving carving out a bigger and bigger role. Tajay Spears is definitely the RB2 behind Tony Pollard, but we're seeing enough work there that he does make for a decent flex option. Between these two, Jagger, Bucky Spears, Tajay Spears, who do you prefer?
I'm going with Spears because the Saints have a solid defense, and again, Spears has a solid role, albeit an RB2 role. But that Colts matchup is just too easy. I think.
Yeah, I'm going Spears as well. I like what we've seen from Bucky Irving, but I don't think this team is just going to completely push Rashad White out of the picture. And what we have seen is that even with Bucky Irving's growing role, the targets haven't really been there. He saw 2 targets last week, 2 targets the week before. A lot of the passing down work is going to Rashad White still. So I think if you're starting Bucky Irving, the floor is dangerously low because he can get 50 or 60 yards, and no touchdowns and no targets, and that doesn't really do all that much for you. You're hoping that he can either rip off a big play or score a touchdown. Or I think Tajay Spears is going to be a little bit more involved. They do like using him near the goal line, so I'm going to go Tajay Spears here, but they're pretty close for me. All right, Jagger. Before we sign off, any closing thoughts on Week 6?
Usual Jeff, man, full eyes, clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. Good luck, guys, out there. Thursday night actually seems like an interesting matchup, and I'll be tilting with the rest of you. So,
Yeah, getting ready for it. I want to thank you, Jagger, for stepping in on such short notice. Always a pleasure when you and I get to talk some football together. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, everybody who liked, commented, left a review, all that good stuff. I'll be back tomorrow morning with Jeff Bell when we look through the Thursday injury reports and every single matchup, kind of dissecting injuries and workloads and news and all that sort of fun stuff. Jagger, you'll be back on Sunday with Joey
mhm.
Wright and Jeff Bell to do our Sunday morning live start sit show right here on youtube.com/at Football Guys Fantasy. And then Alfredo and I will be back on Monday to do waivers. So nonstop content coming your way from the Football Guys. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you soon.